Hi, I'm Mike with PWR. Today we worked on a 2003 Chevy Silverado, rear-wheel drive. We did replace the rack, but because the vehicle had over 300,000 miles, we also decided to replace the power steering pump and the hoses and installed an inline filter.
The first thing we need to do is look over the entire power steering system. This vehicle has a lot of miles on it, and just about everything that can be wrong with this rack and pinion is. It is leaking fluid out of the bellows. The tube that goes from bellow to bellow is not even connected. We will also be replacing the pump and hoses and installing an inline filter on this truck, because we are pretty sure that if the rack is in this bad of shape, the rest of the system is as well. The contamination that could come from the pump could shorten the life of the new rack. We will also be flushing the rest of the system as well. And lucky for us, that is only the oil cooler. Let's get started. We will need to center the wheels. We will start by making sure that we secure the steering wheel. One way to do this is to use a steering wheel holder like this. You can also use a tie strap to secure the strap to the brake pedal. Or you can use the seat belt by looping it through the steering wheel, then locking it in place. This is very important to prevent clock spring damage affecting the airbag operation. Next, make sure you disconnect the battery. Now raise up the vehicle, making sure it is very secure. Remove the skid plate if the vehicle has one. Remove the front wheels. Loosen the jam nut on each outer tie rod. Now remove the cotter pin securing the tie rod and remove the nut. Do this on both ends of the unit. Disconnect both outer tie rod ends from the spindle. We will use this tie rod separator tool to remove them. But do not remove the tie rods from the rack and pinion unit. Why? Because we will need to measure them once the old rack is off the vehicle. We will then transfer those measurements to the new rack. Now it's time to separate the steering shaft from the rack. Remove the 12mm sector shaft through bolt. You will need to separate this. We used a screwdriver and tapped it upwards, sliding it off the shaft. Now remove both lines from the rack using an 18mm crow's foot. These are just a bit hard to get to. Once the lines are removed, we are going to take out both through bolts that hold the rack and pinion to the chassis of the vehicle. Both sides of the bolt are 15/16. Now to get the rack out, slide it off the through bolts. Then slide the rack to the passenger side. Then drop it down and out the bottom. Okay, once the rack is removed, compare the replacement part and make sure the two units are 100% identical. Some specific things to look for. Make sure the inner tie rods are the same length. If the new rack did not come with outer tie rods, make sure that the thread size is a match. Also, the hydraulic connection must match in size and location. And the bushings must be the same size with the same spread. Now, these next steps are very important. Before installing the new rack, you need to make sure that the new rack is centered. Using a 9/16 wrench, you need to rotate the steering shaft all the way in one direction. Then count how many turns it takes you to turn it all the way in the other direction. This rack took 3 1/4 turns. Now turn it back 1 5/8 turns, and the rack is now centered. Next, take a tape measure and measure the distance from the center of the tie rod to the steering shaft, center to center. Mark down your measurement. You'll need to do this for both sides. This is a good time to replace each tie rod with a new one. Believe it or not, these tie rods are tight and in good shape, so we will be reusing these. Either way, install the tie rod to the correct measurement per side. This will help in getting close on the alignment. And remember, anytime you change a rack, the vehicle must be aligned. Now you are ready to put the rack back onto the vehicle. Simply reverse all procedures to install the new rack. Remember, with the steering wheel still locked in place and the main two bolts that hold the rack still loose, do not attempt to move the steering wheel in any fashion to mate it up to the rack. Install the input steering shaft. Now reinstall the 12mm sector shaft through bolt, but don't tighten it down all the way. Now you can tighten up the two main bolts of the rack. Here's a quick note: use recommended torque specification for installation. Now tighten the 12mm sector shaft through bolt. After that, bolt the outer tie rod ends to the spindles. And don't forget to insert the cotter pins to complete the project. At this point, the rack is installed. But before we connect the lines to the rack, we are going to replace the pump and the lines as well. Remember, this vehicle has 309,000 miles, and we don't know how old any of these parts are. First, take the air intake off. Drain the radiator fluid. Then remove the upper radiator hose from the radiator. Bend it out of the way. We are doing this so we can remove the upper and lower fan shroud. This will help us gain access to the power steering pump. After the fan shroud is removed, we will be able to remove the fan so that the belt can then be removed. A special fan wrench will be required to remove the fan, or a large adjustable wrench could work as well. At this time, check for the belt routing diagram or take a picture of the routing. Remove the belt. Look over the belt for cracks and make sure it is in good condition. Replace if needed. On the vehicle, removing the pulley from the pump requires a pulley removal tool that can be obtained from your local parts store. Once the pulley is removed, disconnect the return hose on the back of the pump. Then we need to remove one mounting bolt on the side of the bracket that is attached to the pump, and the 3 bolts that are now exposed after the pulley was removed from the front. Now we are able to remove the old pump. Once the old pump is on the bench, we can transfer the mounting bracket to the new pump. Look over the new and old pumps and make sure that they are an exact match. At this point, transfer the pressure line bracket. But first, here's a very important step. Make sure you replace the old O-ring with the new O-ring that is supplied with the new pump. For this installation, we are also putting a new inline filter in the system. You will notice an arrow which shows the flow direction on the filter. This is very important. The arrow should always point toward the pump. We've referenced a point on the old hose where there is no interference with anything. We'll cut our hose, install our filter in line, then we're ready to install this. We are now ready to install the pump. Simply reverse all the procedures to install the new pump. Use recommended torque specifications for installation. Okay, now that we've installed the pump and the belt, we need to fill the reservoir with the proper fluid. remember to check the owner's manual for the OEM recommended fluid type. In this case, because we have replaced most everything in the system, we will not need to flush the system. Next, turn the wheels lock to lock 10 times. This will help remove the air from the system before starting the vehicle. Removing the air before starting the engine will ensure that you do not damage the internal parts of the new pump. Check the reservoir again and refill as needed. Now, start the engine. Turn the wheels again lock to lock 10 times. Check the reservoir one last time and check the system for leaks. Looks like this job is complete and there are no leaks. This job is done. When ordering a PWR rack and pinion unit, here's a guide for when outer tie rod ends are included. The suffix will always determine what's in the box. Any rack part number with a T suffix determines that the outer tie rods are included. For example, a 42-2706T. Let's do a quick recap. Check belts for cracks or oil contamination. Check hoses for leaks or wear and replace them if they are 5 years old or older. Inspect the power steering system and the suspension system. Always install a new remote reservoir, if applicable. Flush the system with recommended fluid type. Compare the new product to the old product. Every part should be installed to factory torque specs. Vacuum bleed the system every time a line is open. Be sure to watch our other video on flushing and vacuum bleeding a power steering system.
We took the vehicle out for a test ride. We came back, checked for leaks, and also refilled the reservoir. And everything was fine. So this is a wrap for today. And remember, it's 100% new, 100% tested, engineered in Memphis, Tennessee. We'll see you on the next video.